I was just about ready to start the stream. Start the stream, and I suddenly crashed Unity. That's definitely my fault. So hi, it's me, Scott, and this is I think this is our 6th official-ish residency stream. And today I want to talk about symmetry. Spoiler, I actually talked about symmetry a lot yesterday, and then spent a million hours trying to make something, and I ended the stream in retreat. Like, I ended the stream not finishing the thing that I was trying to make, but then I couldn't live with myself, and I went back and I finished it later. So I just couldn't give up. So hi, I'm Scott, and I am currently acting as a technologist in residence at the Children's Museum of Pittsburgh's Museum Lab here in Pittsburgh, where I've been hanging out in this apartment for basically all the time for the last 2 months. I hope everybody is still safe and doing well wherever they are. Today, yeah, we're gonna talk about symmetry. So I talked about symmetry a bit yesterday, but we'll start with some basics today. And just, we care about symmetry, I care about symmetry for this residency project for 2 reasons. One, I feel like symmetry is just a fundamental aesthetic, like detail of aesthetics that it's very low level and humans respond well to it. So like in just dealing with any visual art project, symmetry is going to come up, I think, whether you're deliberately trying to avoid it or not. And whether it's symmetry of form or symmetry of composition or whatever, like it's just a pretty fundamental. Sweet Cruden, it's true. Hi, Draclin, how are you? So from that aspect, it's pretty, it's just symmetry is something that comes up. I'm also a very symmetry-minded person when it comes to the things I make. Also, we're trying to make something resembling life forms. At least that's our current sort of approach, is we're making something that's kind of like a creature of some kind. And symmetry comes up in biology a fair amount as well. And here's the third reason, which just occurred to me, is we're using lots of math to do all of the work that we're doing. And there's there's lots of complicated kinds of symmetry in mathematics we won't deal with, but symmetry is a property of aesthetics, it's a property of biology, and it's a property of math. And since we're using kind of aesthetics and math to make something inspired by biology, I think it's worthwhile to spend a little time looking at it. So first thing to do is fix some wallpaper. We have this adorable creature, this adorable Norwegian creature. But let's move on. We need a new. That creature served us well. That creature showed up yesterday when I was really discouraged by the thing I was working on, so I'm forever grateful. Look at that nice Steve Zissou hat. Look at that adorable Norwegian lamb. I gotta go to Norway. I think that's what all these wallpapers are telling me. So it's, maybe it's a little weird to always start a stream by picking wallpaper, but it's like picking my outfit for the day, almost. Even though I'm going to cover it up. There's this thing. So we saw this wallpaper yesterday, and there was a woman here, precariously standing, and now she's gone. I hope she's okay. I hope she didn't fall off. So, okay, we want to do what? We just want to talk about symmetry a little bit. So, like, symmetry has, like a lot of these concepts we've been talking about, symmetry has a pretty broad range of connotations and even denotations. Like, it can mean a pretty wide array of things. So, like, sometimes it's used very loosely, like to just mean like something that seems balanced or harmonious, and I would never do that. But you can say, like, I think it could be used. In fact, what is that poem? Is it a Blake poem? William Blake Tiger. And he rhymes, but he calls it symmetry. It's pretty good. What immortal hand or eye could frame thy fearful symmetry? I don't quite. What mortal hand or dare frame thy fearful symmetry? We're not going to get into analyzing William Blake poems today, but anyway. So sometimes it's used a little loosely, and and then sometimes it has like incredibly specific meanings. Like there's intense forms of symmetry in mathematics that I have only a vague understanding of. Let's go to the symmetry in mathematics article. Oh, look at that beautiful thing. There's just all kinds of stuff. And it goes deep. It can get pretty deep towards kind of, to me, almost a little bit unrecognizable from what the simple form is. But we'll stick with the simple form. Is a let's see, what do we say? In mathematics, symmetry has a more precise definition: object that is invariant under some transformations. So I think that's a fair thing to say. Although, yeah, I think that's fair to say. That you have a thing and you do something to it, and it's still the same thing, or appears to be the same thing. And I think that's like a very rough fundamental definition before we get specific into the visuals of it. So like their little thing here is symmetrical. So this is, you would maybe call this bilateral symmetry. So it's symmetry on two sides of something. You might also call it mirror symmetry, or reflection is maybe the transformation they're referring to here, where either you took this side like this and you flipped it open and now they match both sides. That's one way to think of this, is flipping. The other way to think of it is that you take this side and you scale it, you like squish it on the y-axis all the way to 0, and then you pull it negative. So those are kind of two ways to think of reflecting something. And it's an interesting distinction, is that reflection, when you look in your mirror, in a mirror, you kind of intuitively think of like, oh, reflection is doing a certain thing. Like reflection means there's a version of me that's facing this way, or that there's a front to back flip kind of thing. But that's not really how a reflection works. It's kind of like the way reflection works in a mirror is, say I'm me and I'm standing in front of me, and then this version in front of me along the z-axis was scaled to 0 and then scaled out the other side. Like I was turned inside out to face the other way. It's kind of a weird concept when you're talking about forms like a human, but three-dimensional forms and two-dimensional forms, it actually works pretty well. And it, in fact, let's just start Open Illustrator so we can just do some really simple examples. But I use that in 3D all the time. So if you had a 3D model, and that 3D model was a person with a chainsaw arm, that's mean. I don't want a chainsaw arm. I want like a watering can arm. So you have this person and they have an arm that's a watering can and they can water flowers, and it's on their right hand. And you're like, well, I would actually prefer it if it was on their left hand. Well, you can't just do the flip like this, because then you're looking at the back of that person, and that person is not symmetrical front to back. The easiest thing to do is sort of scale that person negative and then the other way. So I'll show you what I mean by that, because it's a slightly weird concept until you see it, and then it's not that weird. Very easy to see in 2 dimensions and kind of 3 dimensions. So what I mean by that whatever mirroring or reflection symmetry is, if I have a box here and I want to flip this box to the other side, say I have a line right in the middle. Illustrator doesn't snap lines right to the middle, which is annoying. Also, I don't like the size of everything's just, I don't like anything about this. Okay, ignore this. This is all because Illustrator can't snap to the middle. However, you can draw a square and snap the square to the corners, and then draw a ruler and snap it here. Okay, that was very silly. So I've got this square, and I want I want to make this image symmetrical. So I want this square, wherever the square is, it doesn't have to be at the top. I want to make this symmetrical. So one idea is like, oh yeah, just take it and open it, flip it like this, rotate it along that axis. And that can work in some cases, but again, it wouldn't work with a human. If you rotated me, you'd be looking at my back. So one idea is to duplicate the square, and then instead of thinking about flipping it, if I just squish it so much that I squish it and it turns negative, and pull it out the other side, I've reflected it. So that's how reflections and mirrors work too. it's really weird to think about, but it's very useful in computer graphics to realize that sometimes all you have to do to to mirror something is actually scale it to negative. So anyway, that's a weird thing, but it is a useful thing to know. So yeah, we're talking about bilateral symmetry at the moment. And humans are bilaterally symmetrical, mostly. Like, for the most part, we're bilateral. So if we go to the biology section, oh, look, we get this great facial symmetry and symmetry in biology. And we have all these amazing microorganisms. And we've got like bilateral symmetry here, some other kinds of symmetry that we will talk about later. So there's a lot of bilateral symmetry in nature. Almost any organism that is big enough and lives on land, it's going to have bilateral symmetry if it's like an animal. Humans are like that. Humans are bilaterally symmetrical along I think it's called the sagittal plane. It's the plane that runs right between us. It's kind of weird. So now, but it's not true on other planes, right? Like we were just talking about, if you divide me on this plane, I won't be the same on both sides. It's going to be the front side of my body and the back side of my body are not drastically different, all things considered, but they're pretty different. And certainly the top side of my body and bottom side of my body are very different. So humans are largely bilaterally symmetrical on the outside of their body, right? Like maybe I have a mole on one side and not on the other, but in general, you know, there's certainly maybe details or reasons that isn't true, but in general, that's true. And that's not true on the inside of your body, though. So your lungs are pretty symmetrical, but most of your other organs start to get pretty asymmetrical. So it's like internally, you're pretty symmetrical top to bottom, and then somewhere in the middle that messes up, and then you become symmetrical again. And that we also have some other forms of symmetry. I think you could argue that like our eye has some radial symmetry. So anyway, we're talking about bilateral symmetry and what it takes to make something bilateral. There's also other kinds of symmetry, like we were just looking at here. There's radial symmetry. So bilateral symmetry, again, if we're going with this idea, is like I have a thing, I do something to it, and it looks exactly the same, we're going to call it symmetrical. So this fly, if I do that reflection transform, that reflect, or that mirror, whatever you call it, it looks the same on both sides. This flower, if I rotate it by some number of degrees, by, I think 72 degrees, let's say, because it's got 5 out of 360. I think that's right. If I rotate it by 36 degrees, you won't be able to tell. I mean, of course, there's, again, just like with humans, there's going to be little imperfections and things, but if this was a perfect flower and I rotated it by 70 degrees, you wouldn't be able to tell. So let's see if I actually did that math right. So if we made a star with 5 points, I don't know why I decided the star should be upside down. And then we decided to rotate this star. Well, that's going to be a bad example. Shoot. Illustrator, again, is not working with us. I'm kind of ready to be done with Illustrator in my life. I feel like I want to switch to a more of a drafting tool. Also, I always want to see the align Illustrator. It's like the most important thing to me. Like I feel like I want to use it more often than not, more as like a tool for drafting or parametric design, and not just drawing. And it's not very good at that. Okay, let's try this again. So let's draw a star in the middle of this, and now we'll actually have an axis around which to rotate it. In fact, I'm gonna change my mind one more time. We're gonna make it circle instead. Just so it's easier to see. Because if we don't rotate it around the center, this example is not going to work. Okay, we now have a star. Great. And we know we can rotate it, and it's going to be great. And so if we rotate this, if I rotate it like 10 degrees, then obviously you can tell. But I think if we rotate it 72, is that right? You can't tell. My center wasn't in the middle like I was fearing, and so it messed up, but it looks like the same form even though I rotated it by 72 degrees. Obviously, if I did 180 degrees, it wouldn't. It would flip it, right? Or if I did it 360 degrees, it would certainly be the same. But 72, or some multiple of 72, it will look the same. So that's how radial symmetry works, is some number of degrees you can rotate something and it will be the thing. And often you'll see like there's usually like a number of times that is. This says 4, 5, 6, or 8 times. So tetramerism, pentamerism, hexamerism, octamerism, respectively. And so if you're truly like that, you don't have like a left or right side, but you do have a top. You do have a top and bottom. You do have a front and back. There's no. If it's around that one axis, so like this flower, this one has 6, so this would be every 60 degrees. Here's 5 degrees inside of an apple. So outside of an apple, well, yeah. So looking down an apple, you have some radial symmetry. Icosahedral symmetry. That one's cool. Subunit area 23. So that's getting more complicated. But icosahedral symmetry, I guess you could orient these things like an icosahedron. Okay, we'll ignore that one for a second. But it's an object that I can do something to it and it would still look like the same thing. So that starts to get weird with more complicated polyhedra, for sure. Spherical symmetry is like the most amazing one. Is draw an endless or great but finite number of symmetrical axes through the body. So like a sphere is almost the perfect embodiment of symmetry, because anything you do to a sphere, unless you're actually distorting it to where it's not a sphere anymore, but if you are rotating it or mirroring it on any axis, if you're trying to bilaterally slice it along any plane, it's always the same on both sides. So like these cool little freshwater algae, so beautiful, have spherical symmetry. Now, maybe because they have these little distributions of cells, they're not infinitely symmetrical, but I think you get the idea. And so we're interested, and biradial, I don't even know about that one. All these symmetries I don't even know about. Of course, plants have all kinds of symmetries, and you can sometimes have helical, which is like, asymmetry. So there's certain kinds of asymmetry that can be an important adaptation. So not everything in nature is symmetrical, of course, but there's lots of high level examples of symmetry, and so I think it's worth thinking about if we're trying to make organisms. Look at this cool. We got this nice radial creature. There's lots of aquatic and microscopic radial creatures, and then as you get bigger, I think you get more and more bilateral. So I wonder if there's any creatures that are bilaterally symmetrical on 2 planes. Maybe a worm? Now it still has a head on one end, right? I don't know. Okay, so again, these are the symmetries that we're really thinking about today. Bilateral symmetry, radial symmetry. Tons of the stuff that we've been doing on stream lately has been very focused on radial symmetry. Basically, everything that we did yesterday was at least a start on radial symmetry. And even back with our super formula stuff last week, we still had radial symmetry, if not spherical symmetry, once we did insane things to those spheres. So I kind of want to take a step back from some of those exercises we've been doing, because those are very much about aesthetics and form. But I feel like I'm not settled on those aesthetics. So we've been making these real pretty glowy things. Let's just look at what we've made so far. I mean, as far as just these simple studies. Oh, in fact, I don't want it to be super loud. So what did we make? I mean, the first one was maybe not so much. Really, it's like the last 3 were the ones where we were really, maybe the last 4. But we had this guy. That's super loud. Sorry if it's super loud. Turn it down some. So with these this was using the super formula to try to generate some forms. And you can see, looking at this, like almost at this moment, we see that radial symmetry. So even though, you know, we got some weird stuff. In fact, it looks like in this case we have radial. So we have kind of a thing that I just wanted to see. We have radial symmetry. If we call this the y-axis, we have radial symmetry around the y-axis, but it looks like we have that reflection symmetry on this x-axis, up and down here. And even as we distort this and we mess with it and we go through all these weird permutations, I think, except for like right here, we've broken it. We've broken our radial symmetry because we're in the midst of transitioning between two states. But once we settle on a state, I think we always find in these forms that I think we always have radial symmetry and bilateral on another axis. Radial on the y, bilateral on the x, with that super shape. And then with, I mean, all of these sort of kaleidoscopic hypnotic things we've been doing are very, like, kaleidoscopes are just radially symmetrical by nature, I think. I guess there's some weird kinds of volumetric kaleidoscopes, if they're still even called kaleidoscopes, but lots of radial symmetry here. Then we did these spherical harmonics studies, and I think this one's a little harder to pin down because we're doing crazy stuff, but I think broadly, whoops. Again, if we ignore the points that were between, like in transition points, like right here, we seem to be bilaterally symmetrical looking at this, but I think we're actually radially symmetrical, even though we have some interesting forms here. We don't have the bilateral symmetry x and y on these forms though, because I think the way this formula works, maybe we do at some points, like in points of transition, but I think the way this formula works, that one looks pretty close actually. This one looks radially symmetrical and bilaterally symmetrical, but in general, lots of radial symmetry here, which is, I think, works nicely because like we want like aquatic life radial symmetry. I should have said marine life. But that would be all kinds of sort of wormy things and anemone kinds of things and starfish kinds of things and jellyfish kinds of things. So, and once you go into the radial symmetry, I think you start to become evocative of either the microscopic world or of the aquatic world. And if you're on land, I guess you're dealing mainly in plants. There's lots of radial symmetry in plants and flowers and things like that on the surface of the earth, but on land, but I don't know. I can't really think of any radially symmetrical land organisms above a certain scale. Cool. Radiolarian skeletons. Radiolarian's a cool word. One of the dangers here is once you get into these microscopic forms, especially in the world we live in right now, is like if you have a spherically radial microscopic form that has any kind of little horns on it, you're starting to probably look like coronavirus. So like, kind of a weird world to be in right now. So I don't know. I've been thinking a lot about this. If I want to be super careful about not evoking something like this, like I think in general this isn't quite the look I'm going for. Or if I just want to say like, hey, the microscopic world is a very lush and varied world, and coronavirus is one citizen of that world. So here's our beautiful diatoms again. Oh my gosh. So to me, I don't know if this is true for everybody. I think it is often true, but radial symmetry really has a draw for me. And I was reading something about aesthetics in general and how we like symmetry, but we tend to don't like symmetry if it's too simple. Like if it's too bland or there's not enough. We like a little bit of complexity in our symmetry. So if it's like, I just have I'm keep hitting Mac shortcuts. You know, I could make some symmetrical composition where I have something here and I can reflect it down here along both these axes, and it's okay, but it's like there's just not much to it. Though with the same forms, with just a circle and just black and white, I could make really intricate, much more intricate things of like overlapping circles and yeah, like all these kind of, this has a name, but I can't remember what the name is. So that's where I am. I'm interested in exploring some symmetrical forms, and so we've been getting pretty intense Unity, but I think today I just want to like play around in P5 a little bit and just play with symmetry. So I think I want to do that on Glitch. P5 does have a web editor, but it is not my favorite for various reasons. In fact, you know, we could do stuff here actually, like even, you know, some of those forms we were just looking at, if we know, how do we want to do this? Is that really? Is that true? I'm not sure if I believe that. Maybe I believe it. But if I, even without any code, even if I just want to start doing some compositions like we just looked at in Illustrator or something, I could say, okay, let's every 36 degrees do a copy of this and then just duplicate it all the way around. And I could say, let's have no fill. And we can start to do things like that. So I didn't do anything here except rotate a circle, and then we start to get a more interesting, more complex form. So some of these things are not very complicated to do. Like you could just do it just like that without even thinking about it. Some of them get a little more complicated, but I think the mathematical principles behind them are pretty straightforward. So let's do, we'll call it top spot, because that's my symmetry palindrome for the day. Okay, top spot. So what's going to go on in top spot? We want to see it. And we want none of this. We just want some, I mean, we could just do it inside there. So if we just include P5. Yeah, 1.0 is out. Big deal. I don't mean that as a dismissive big deal. I mean it's actually a big deal. Okay, so there, and then in script we'll do like, so I never remember, I'm bad enough at remembering processing syntax to begin with, but then once you get into P5 land, like, I don't know. So let's do a couple things. Let's say color mode, let's say angle mode. Let's just start setting things up a little bit. Angle mode is going to be degrees. And color mode is going to be HSB. And we want the range to be 0 to 1. So those are, I'm just like setting up some general parameters. And size, we'll say window.width, window.height, and then background 0.5. Who's calling me from Houston, Texas? I don't know. Okay, I definitely have an error here. So what's my problem? Who is calling me from Houston, Texas? Houston's got the Oilers. They're the greatest football team. Oh, it's not called this. What is it called? Create canvas. Okay, see, I'm doing great. I already just can't remember how to do anything. Create canvas. That's not right. Why would that be true? we certainly have other... Where's our silly drawing thing? We're off to a great start. Oh, okay, they just have variables called window width, window height. That's my fault. I don't know why it'd be 100, but... Okay, so that's all fine, and then we do just want to make some minor. Margin 0, padding 0. Okay, we now have our canvas. And that's just great. What do you want, Houston, Texas? So, we don't really want to be that dark. So what do we want to do here? We want to just, first let's say wherever my mouse is, let's draw a thing. So that's easy enough. So let's say where mouse X and mouse Y, let's draw a 16, an ellipse with a radius of 16. And so now I have this radius and it's following me around. It's very slow for some reason. I don't know why. I actually sort of want to say change this and just make it 640, 640. Is it just because P5 is kind of slow? This would make Life Is Yours lose his mind if he saw this how slow this mouth was. So if we just want to start thinking about bilateral symmetry and what that means, I want whatever I do on this side to be reflected on the other side. So if we think about what that means in terms of math, we have a couple of options. So one is to do the thing I just said, like turn that axis inside out. So we could do something where not only do I want to draw an ellipse wherever the mouse is, I could draw it from the reverse of that, which is the width minus... Well, I did it along the wrong axis, but that, okay. I did the y-axis. We actually wanted to do the x-axis. Was the first thing I was going to say. Width minus mouse y. Okay, so now we suddenly have some bilateral symmetry. And it's already just sort of interesting. I mean, it's so much more interesting already, which was such a simple change. Just to say like, oh, well, that's... Now we can see these two things interacting and they kind of move and interact together. So there's a symmetry of motion that has emerged here that is kind of interesting. I don't think we can do this with alpha. Can we? We can. Okay, so I can get like little motion trails. Let's go even dimmer. So now you can start to see symmetrical forms emerging. Underneath. Will those ever go away? You'd think they would go away after 100 iterations. Or maybe something about how this is blended means that's not true. We could also just choose to not do this. Just don't even draw the background, and then we can do stuff like this. And we can do strange ribbony symmetrical drawing. And we could say maybe that we don't want, and that the fill should be black. So I'm kind of a sucker for these kinds of things. In fact, I'm gonna say no fill. And just have our circles a little more like what we had before. So, and I could do the exact same thing, mirroring bilaterally on the other. Although if I'm going to mirror on both of those, I actually need 4. I need 4 ellipses because I'm going to reflect vertically and horizontally. So that would look like So this is reflecting the width and the height. This is reflecting none. This is where I actually am. This is reflecting the width. This is reflecting the height. This is reflecting both. And so now I have sort of this. And actually, once we get into this, it's funny because you could, I don't know why this hadn't occurred to me, but here, I'll say it anyway, is this true? It's not true. It's almost true. That bilateral symmetry, in some cases, if you are bilaterally symmetrical on two axes, I guess it is the same as a rotation. Like you couldn't rotate one side of me 180 degrees and have it match. But if I was bilaterally symmetrical on that side, you could, and it would count the same. Because I was going to say, is we've almost made this a rotation. Like we could rotate this. That's not quite true, but it's almost true. So what else do we want to do with this? Maybe we make the stroke semi-transparent. And you probably, I mean, there's a million apps that do stuff like this, iPad apps. I'm definitely not like creating something revolutionary here. And if we wanted, we could modulate this radius. So we could say, okay, so if we wanted to give it a fixed size, we could just swap all of these and have bigger circles. And then if we wanted to do, we could do radius times the absolute value of sine of millis, which is just an internal clock. And now it's just gonna like quickly pulse large and small, which is a weird brush. I don't want to make it bigger. So these almost have a radial feel, but it's not quite there. I could sort of deliberately emulate that. So, so this is our very simple dual axis bilaterally symmetrical, and we could do this in 3D too. You know, like so we've split this where we are reflecting on two axes. We could also reflect on a fourth if we wanted to. I don't really want to, because I don't actually know the state of 3D primitives in 3JS. I think they work. Okay, so where do we want to go next? So I think what we want to do next, though, is try radial symmetry. And radial symmetry is a little weirder, but not horribly so. So I'm trying to think of there's two ways we could go about this. Either way, you could do a thing where we could use the rotate command in processing, which essentially would say like rotate the paper every frame. So it's like I draw a circle, or even every drawing. So I draw a circle, rotate the paper, draw a circle, rotate the paper. And I'm actually still drawing the circle in the same place, but I've kind of rotated my paper that I'm drawing on. Let's try that way. I think it will work. So we want to do a loop. Let's start with 5. So we want to do 5 things, and we want to rotate the paper 5 times. And we want to rotate it by 360 divided by 5, because that's the number of degrees. So what did I say that was? 72? This is a let. And then and we'll go back to 16 for a moment. Who's asking for radius? I've definitely done everything wrong. So first we need to problem is we're rotating around the bottom left corner of the screen, not around the center. So this will help with that. But then we will also need to offset our xy by that. So basically we're saying normally the coordinate 0 is in the lower left. We're just saying that we would prefer that the lower left be... okay, cool. So that is one way to do this. And now we have radial symmetry. And if we wanted to do this a little more nicely, we could say, you know, this will be our radial count. We'll just have kind of a global up here. And this will be the count that we want. Oops. And we could change that to 12 if we wanted, maybe a smaller radius here. And now we can start to do stuff like this, but it's pretty satisfying. So of course, again, I'm not like inventing anything here. There's plenty of iPad apps and various other things that do this kind of thing. Let's do... This is gonna look weird, but let's try it. Oh, that needs to be mouse X divided by the width. A beautiful rainbow. Yep, darker, I was right. Let's make our background fading again, because I kind of liked that. That's pretty satisfying. Let's so really color should be more like the distance from the center, but we'll ignore that for the moment. So I'm doing the exact same thing that we started with, right? Like I'm just drawing a circle on the screen where my mouse is. And that was super not interesting. And then I added bilateral symmetry and it suddenly got more interesting. And now I've added this 12-fold radial symmetry and suddenly it's like, oh, this is like actually a thing, almost. It's something that it's at least interesting. I'm not gonna say it's good. No, background. Let's do it on black. Actually, let's just do this once in setup, and then we will just accumulate. And now we can just draw forever. What's funny is the way I did my color based on X value could almost just color this in forever and have it match, or have it like a smooth gradient. Depends on where the Y is, I guess. So it's funny because in art, certainly in architecture, symmetry is a key concept, right? Like that's just what? As far back as you want to go. Radial symmetry or bilateral symmetry, you can find a radial tholos. Various temples in different places will have different kinds of symmetry. I think a tholos is to some degree radially symmetrical, yeah. So, and in you know, like pottery certainly is something there's a lot of radial symmetry. But I would say in kind of a pictographic art, visual art, not even non-representational. Symmetry is not very popular. There's not a lot of symmetry in art. I could think of maybe some like pop art with symmetry, but I think in a lot of visual arts, even if symmetry is used, especially symmetry in composition, even if not exactly in form, just to have a balanced composition, I think symmetry is not. I don't know. It's just if you just think of a work of art, and you will probably find some asymmetry to it. And there's rules for that too. There's reasons to break symmetry and calls for it. And where it's like, oh, the rule of thirds. You don't want the thing in the middle. You actually want it on a 1/3 line. Whatever. There's all these compositional rules on why you want to avoid symmetry. And when there is symmetry, certainly in sculpture, there's radial symmetry, and there's a lot of bilateral symmetry. But radial symmetry in visual art is. Okay, I was about to say this, and that isn't true. Maybe in fine art, but in all other kinds of like craft and art, you will find this kind of radial symmetry. So, it's very common. I think I was starting to say something I didn't quite mean, or say it in a way I didn't mean it. Even though maybe in the fine arts it's not as common, in all other sorts of traditional and religious arts, it's super common. So you can find like Celtic art. We'll almost certainly find. Yeah, a lot of radial forms. If you look at like mandalas, you'll certainly find lots of radial forms. You can look at Christian rose windows in cathedrals and find lots of radial forms. You could look at Islamic tile art. Islamic tile art is amazing. It blows my mind. The complexity of the geometry that goes into these is pretty astounding. I've been trying to learn about how tiling works. Jacqueline, you love my energy. What do you mean by that? Just today or every day? Like the way I want to learn how tiling works, I think. And maybe I need this Islamic art for kids book, because the rules for how tiling works can be so astonishingly complicated. Or maybe not even, I don't mean complicated as in like too hard, but complicated in like lots of steps and permutations. What am I mass producing? Oh, mass producing videos? Or wait, I'm confused. You mean mass producing these kinds of art, hand-drawn tile? Well, there's certain kinds of creative processes that are sort of meditative by virtue, almost on purpose. I mean, I think even when you think of illuminated manuscript, where there's almost sort of a part of the function of creating the thing and its intricacy is a form of meditation. I think mandalas are what come to mind for me as the most, or sand mandalas are like deliberately complicated and intricate and beautiful, but any one moment, any one motion is maybe sort of a little mindless or a little repetitive, but that's not, I mean, look at the forms that it creates, like the placing of any one grain of sand is there's nothing special about that, but what emerges out of it, I think, is what is so astounding. I've been reading a bit on some of there's been attempts by sort of modern, and I mean by modern, I mean in the last few hundred years, modern mathematicians to understand the underlying mathematics of this and come up with formulas and approaches to create these forms, but they're just so beautiful, so amazing. There's one form that I really think is really cool that's called substitution tiling. I think that's what it's called. Where you come up with, it's really cool because it's a set of rules. So it's very achievable algorithmically. But it's like, okay, say I have this form. I'm going to blow this form up. And then every time I have a form like this, I'm going to draw y in it, right? Like I draw y right there. So now I have this thing. Well, now suddenly I have that form again. So by drawing this y, I've created this form yet again. And so I have to follow my same rule, and I'm going to draw a y inside it. And when I draw the y inside it, well, wait a minute. Over here, these actually look like more of those forms, but they're just kind of reflected. So I need to do that form too. And it just can repeat forever. And then when you put those things together, you can get really interesting results. Let's see. I think there was like a library of tiling. I haven't fully wrapped my head around how I would want to. Library of tilings. Found like an archive of tilings somewhere. No, I've lost them forever. But that's cool though. A Python library for good. Maybe I should get enough. You know, I am not much of a Python person, and I never have been. But the more I'm getting into like these things that have sort of algorithmic, academic kind of underpinnings, there's a whole lot of stuff in that world in Python. Like the academic world loves Python. There's a C++ library. I could wrap this and use it in Unity. Oh, it's so good. Okay, I'm getting distracted. Getting very distracted. Yeah, I can understand that. I can definitely understand that. There's just Python is, yeah, it's one of those things where one of the nice things about Python is that it can be pretty accessible to someone who's new, or to someone for whom programming is like not what they're trying to do. You know, they're in some other field of research, or they're trying to accomplish some other thing, and programming is just an ends to the means. And Python, I think Java's kind of like this too. But so lots of what you see in that world is not very good. Or you'll find, I feel like I find so much Python code that is like, this does a cool thing, but you could never use it in the real world because it was written for a PhD thesis or something, and it just would never hold up in the real world. And so because of that, I've kind of stayed away from that world, but I am kind of interested in, like, especially when you look at things like machine learning and TensorFlow and all of that stuff. Of course, you can find that. There's a lot of those things that you find in other languages, but it seems like there's a wealth of it in Python. And when since I'm interested in like weird academic approaches to tiling, then maybe I can find some weird code from somebody's thesis about weird academic approaches to tiling. Oh, we didn't even talk about it. Another great thing that has radial symmetry is, of course, snowflakes. I think snowflakes always have the same number of points, but we'll ignore that. Maybe they have 12? I don't remember. That is true. There's some magic to it, but I feel like I could sort of learn to appreciate that magic. Like, if I need a sequence of numbers or something, at this point in my life, I don't need to write the code to fill an array with the sequence of numbers. Like I kind of would, there's so many little snippets of code I've written 1 trillion times, and I kind of wouldn't mind if there were little convenient ways to not have to do that. You know what I think you'd want for the snowflake is you'd want bilateral symmetry and you'd want radial symmetry. So for each radial slice, how would you even conceive of that? Would that work? Oh, yeah. So we have kind of bilateral symmetry for each of our radial slices. Well, that's pretty good. Maybe that's normal. This starts to look like sort of indigenous South American artworks. Mayan. Yeah, that's hard. That distinction gets complicated. As if it's like, hey, I'm just using this as a tool. It's an ends to a means of just trying to solve the thing. But yeah, once you're actually trying to like, once you want your code to be useful out of the narrow domain that you're using it in, or even not just your code, but your mentality about problem solving. And we got some cool radial symmetry and bilateral reflective symmetry. These are great. They're great color palettes too. I mean, I don't assume those are original colors, but I like the color palette. Let's start giving homework. It's funny because the more I think about it, the more examples of this. Okay. Thanks for chatting with me. Have a good call. The more I think about it, there's so many more kinds of. Even though again, in the fine art world, I'm not thinking of a ton of examples of this, but there's a million examples on that verge of an amoeba generator. Oh, Draclin, I was going deep on that with those fractals, trying to get those. I finally got them to work, but now I think they're maybe more complicated than what I actually want to do. But some of those Paul Bork fractals, the radial ones, look so much like cellular life. I just figured out how to do this one actually yesterday. Maybe I should do this one. Maybe they're too more organic. I'm having a crisis trying to really determine what the forms are for this. What are these creatures made of? Are they made of light? Those Van Eckel, is it Van Eckel? Van Eckel? Hans Van Eckel? What's that guy's name? Eckelberg? I'm just making up. Okay, what is the guy's name? This is like an early sort of nature illustrator. We got some of his work here. Yeah, so like in the spectrum of aesthetics that I'm interested in for this project, we started with all these sort of glowy. Well, no, okay, let's go where we started. We started with sort of pure math and geometry, kind of pure form, and then we got kind of celestial with it. We got a lot of dotted lines and things, and I still love this thing. Then we gradually got more and more spherical, and as we got spherical, we started to get very glowy. And that led to most of the studies last week. And then we started to shift towards these diatoms and get a little more like radial and stained glassy, like these diatoms. And then we started to get more organic. And I just still don't know the answer. Part of me this morning was trying to imagine shader techniques to get this, to get like these strange, very organic, but also very geometric kinds of things, like a hybrid of geometric and organic. Haeckel, Haeckel, Haeckel. Ernst Haeckel. I don't know where I got the van. This guy's amazing. His illustrations are all astonishingly beautiful. And good and useful and valuable. Like they let's see, what would we call him? Is he a naturalist? Yes, a naturalist, sort of scientist, but not quite a scientist. So he's very published artwork of Haeckel. Yeah, over 100 detailed multicolor illustrations of animals and sea creatures. So he's like a very talented sort of naturalist, biologist. Maybe scientist isn't quite the right word. I feel like naturalists and scientists aren't really compatible. But also just an astounding artist, just draftsperson and illustrator. So like there's a lot to these forms that I think. So speaking of forms, a radially symmetrical form here. And this one's interesting because the interior is radially symmetrical every 90 degrees. And then out here we're like what? This octal? 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Yeah, I forgot what the word was. with 80 radial symmetry on 8 axes. So I was trying to imagine what it would be like to, because especially the black and white ones, I think are just lovely. So okay, going back to speaking about form and composition. A lot of these forms aren't symmetrical, obviously, and the composition isn't perfectly symmetrical, but you would look at this and call it a symmetrical composition. I mean, I would look at this and be like, oh, this is a beautiful symmetrical composition. Obviously, it's not mathematically symmetrical. This is not a reflection of this. It is a close enough form that our mind will register it as such, but you know, none of these are perfectly symmetrical. But I would still call this, in terms of a composition, I think it is symmetrically balanced composition. And that's very obvious for where there's 1-to-1 ratios, but he even has these places where it's like, well, to make this form compositionally balanced, we actually needed a little more visual weight in these negative spaces. So I think he's incredibly adept at that. So I love these. I love the arrangements. I mean, the arrangements are just beautiful. Oh yeah, these. Gosh, should our stuff look like this? Should we make really weird organic? I love the color palette of this. I love this thing that's just got what appears to be eyeballs all over the side. I think I need to get... Can I get this book? When was this book published? They're so good. So I guess the place that I am now, and I don't have any reference for this yet, is how am I gonna adopt these forms? Like, I want to synthesize all these ideas, right? I want to synthesize all of I want the pure math. I want a little bit of sort of the celestial structures. I could maybe do without the glowy. I was definitely going hard on the glowy, but now maybe I don't need glowy if I have sort of like weird, if it looks like a weird microscope slide or something. So the glowy, I mean, the luminous is not bad. Maybe that's what I want, is some luminousness, if not the glowy. And then now we have these forms. And then also I've been like starting to do some exploration yesterday and this morning on generative, sort of generative cartoon creatures, or more cartoony kind of generative creatures. So yeah, I remember this project was done in Cinder, which is cool. It's interesting. They're very jellyfishy. But these are not too far away from having a feeling like those Eckelberg drawings. Like, these are in that realm. The forms are relatively simple. Deep sea illustrations. So those look like... Yeah, this thing. I was looking for more info on this. Where this whole thing was crazy. Where I think it started with bone structures, and the bone structures knew how to dance, and they sort of gradually evolved into little organisms. These little strange little dancing characters. Definitely, I need to find more about that because I think that's really interesting. Here's all these like pixel sprite creatures. I think it's cool too. I don't think that's an aesthetic that we want to go for, but I think like the form and colors are really nice. I haven't seen these. These are pretty cool. Wonder how these are done. Maybe just Photoshop? Okay, so they worked from Haeckel's work. So what do we do? Just like take... So, I mean, are these just like photoshopped compositions, or were these generated? I wish there was a little more about the process. They look nice, but they do look like sort of just photoshopping together Van Eckel. Ooh. Generative polygonal insects, like that. Like another iteration of that. These are pretty. Well, that's horrible. Look at that thing. Ugh. Terrible eyeball creatures. So there's certainly work in this realm to look at and be... It's, of course, Pokemon. To look at and be inspired by. Yeah, these are the insects. Those are very pretty. Even this. Gosh, even just these very simple... I'd started to do some explorations that were definitely in this realm. Very simple. We're getting off topic a little bit. I kind of have covered, okay, it's an hour in. We talked about symmetry in the way I wanted to talk about it today as sort of the foundation of some of these other explorations, I think, of what maybe kind of the things I'm interested in and what I'm looking for. These are just beautiful. Very pretty. Yeah, I love these. Are gorgeous. Love them. That one looks like a transformer. Okay, we got to start getting some generative friends in here. This one was better. Good, 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 good. What do you know? Generative creatures. That's not how you spell that word. That's pretty. Definitely has a creature quality to it. That's not a bad synthesis of sort of geometric and Eckel. I'm going to continue to say his word name incorrectly. Yeah, these the Cinder Medusae. These are pretty. More little evolving creatures. Those are cool. Gosh, it's hard in this space. There's just so much inspiring work and so many different inspiring styles that it's hard not to get sort of wrapped up in the inspiration. Funny, because almost anything you do, if you, that's fun. Wow, are these real? I thought these were generative for a second. That's funny because some of those forms were, like this one in particular, this little boomerang guy was in my head for one of the creatures. So these are more our radial area. Okay, so that's what those Haeckel drawings are of. Cool. Yeah, these are great. Very good. Very good. This is a nightmare. I want to know more about it, though. Why didn't it take me to the place? Okay, we got lost. Where was that thing? It's funny because this is like not totally far from the conceptually of what I would want to make, but then when I actually see the result, it's like, oh boy, I don't want to make that. Like I want to, you know, I was thinking like, oh yeah, I could have little tendrils and tentacles and eyeballs and it would be really cute. But then when I see that, it's not very cute. Generated tentacle eyeball monsters. Generated over 100 of them. Like, there's something to this, but I also hate it a little bit. So a challenge I will have is like exploring these realms, especially I was doing something this morning with eyeballs on it. I will admit, I've been exploring eyeball realms already, and that is that's a nightmare. Look at these things. These plankton. Give me some plankton. Mammalian magical microbes of the ocean. I love you. Look at this thing. Stunning. Stunning little creatures. Okay, the other one's not as stunning. I'll say. That one I'm into. So, great. Pokemon, great. We saw that thing. Yeah, even these little like, okay, I have screwed up and just went to links of pictures and not links of pages. These echo things. Look at how beautiful that is. Like, if I could just get somewhere between cartoony and this with more geometry, like, that's not too far from some of the stuff we were trying to make yesterday. Okay, I need this book. Is the thing, right? I have to have this. I'm sure I'm the trillionth person to be interested in this work. Can I get like a digital version? Art forms from the ocean. Art forms in nature. All right. What does my friend have to offer here? Art forms in nature. So what was that art forms in the ocean book? Was it something else? Okay, so we have some Kindles. Art forms in nature. So these are all just different versions of this. And kind of just want to grab the Kindle one. Yeah, I want to look inside. I'd love to. Thanks, Amazon. Are they not all colors? I see. So this says color plates. Including full color plates. Cool, cool. Well, somebody spilled something on the Ciliata page. Look at those. Look at these. I'm just overwhelmed with the possibilities. We can't make all of these things. We've got to find some subset of things that we can apply rules to make. Okay, I want this. I'll buy that later. The problem, though, I saw these. I like these little friends. Process of making generative creatures. Bugs in my code. I wanted to see those other little cartoony friends. But they're gone forever. Did I keep doing it? Ugh. Useless. 9 times out of 10, that's what I want. But, okay. Is to see the picture. But in this case, I actually want to go to the link. So I wanted the little round. Ooh. Oh, beautiful. Voxel posse, like those little friends. So I'm not seeing that one particular one with the little round buddies. This one, curious creatures. Okay. So, fauna of Slugia. Computational generated creatures living on the imaginary island. Okay. I'd love a preview. That's Slugia. Okay. It's not quite, I mean, we're up in like large scale fauna here. Not really what I'm looking for. So is this a part of the generative process, or is this just like a drawing process? Like, are these forms? Yeah, I was thinking of something like that with some attachment points. Well, this is very cool. It's not quite what I'm looking for, but I like it. I love these little friends. Lovable vector-based creatures. I've certainly been thinking. So this is, I've been drawn to this direction too. It's like simple, sort of really illustrative, vector-y kinds of friends. Patrick. Ooh, the showcase. What's in the showcase? Too much. Pinterest. Interesting. I could install the thing and do my own pens, but whatever. I just wanted those creatures. Okay. Well, these are cute. That's Flabian, Gume, Jarlane. Oh, should my creatures have names? These definitely have a Tim Burton-esque quality to these friends. I do like them, but they're not quite in the realm of what we're looking for. Very pretty. Generative 3D printing. Yeah, okay, so this is the other idea. Another idea. Oh, this is a universal everything. Man, universal everything. Killing me. Nature? Oh gosh. Are these all generative fishies? A lot of projectors. What do you do on the little screen? Oh, it's very pretty. Oh no, are they making creatures? Is this my thing? Oh no. Oh no, my heart hurts my heart a little bit. This is pretty close to the realm of what I've been thinking. I mean, sometimes you just can't let that stop you. People are going to have similar ideas. Oh, universal everything. Why do you have to do this to me? Okay, well, so this is a little disheartening because this is it's certainly in the realm of the thing I'm thinking of making. For sure. I can't quite tell what happens. Like, as far as... I mean, it does seem like you, as a visitor, have some agency. To make a thing on the phone. And then your thing hangs out in the pond. Yeah, I wish they would show what you do. Yeah, so you make your own little warbly friend, I guess. And then you send it out. Oh, man, yeah. That hurts. Well... I had to think about this a little bit because, you know, you can think about it in a couple different ways. One, you can think like, oh, something's been done in this realm and I just don't want to do it anymore. Which I've definitely had that kind of thing in the past where it's like I'm interested in something and then I find out somebody's done it and then I say like, oh no, I just don't want to do it and throw up my hands to do something different. Or like, I could be more reasonable and say that this is not exactly the thing I'm trying to make. It's different in a lot of ways. Some of the high level, like a high level description of it, everybody visits and makes a creature is pretty similar, which I don't love. Especially because I've been thinking of you go up to a little station and you make a creature and you let it go. And so that is what is happening here. Now what happened, how you make those creatures and what those creatures look like and how the creatures interact, I don't know. Like this seems more just like they kind of animate and swim around. It's pretty, and it's very simple. So it's like a super simple interface. It's just a stripy thing. So it's like, as far as generative creatures, they're very simple. So like that's different than what I want to try to do. But, you know, it's still... Well, it's good that I saw it, I guess. I had to think about that. Definitely had to think about that. I don't think I'm to the point in this project where I have to be 100% decided on what I'm doing, but getting close. probably really loud, sorry. Okay, well, I don't know. I'll have to internalize that a little bit and see what I think about it. It's kind of my own fault. I kind of deliberately don't follow the creative tech world very closely. But maybe I should. Like I kind of deliberately don't. I don't look at like creative applications and stuff like that anymore. Is this projection mapping or is this CG? Must be CG, right? Unless those plants are moved so precisely. Oh no, more creatures? Oh, you're killing me. Oh man. Oof. 2013. I didn't know about it. Yeah, it's funny because there's just so many pieces of this. Like even that, like I started out talking about the movement and gesture thing, moving your body using Connect, or like that part is in here. And the little drawing of creatures is in here. They're very beautiful. They're super good at what they do. Well, heck. It's my own fault just for not being more up to date on what was this one called? Universal Everything 100 Hands. With this one? What's this one? Man, I feel like it's not really fair to feel this way, but I feel like a little scooped. I've been scooped. Fancy version of texturing. Oh my gosh. I mean, this gets rough because when I start looking at these things and suddenly I'm looking at projects that cost, hundreds of thousands of dollars or millions of dollars, where it's not what I'm one person, that is not what my budget is. Starts to feel a little discouraging. Okay, well, anyway, whatever. We've just got to think about what that means and what we're going to do about that, because I don't exactly know. It's a thing. It's a thing that happens sometimes when you're making something. There's of course, other people have ideas too. So, okay, I need to internalize this a little bit. I also need to internalize these Eckel illustrations and see what I think about those. And then we will be back tomorrow. And tomorrow, I don't exactly know what we'll do tomorrow. We'll play with some more. Maybe we'll start thinking about some generative creature approaches, if that's still what I want to do. Right? I don't know. Okay. Have a lovely day, and I will talk to you all very soon. See you next time. Bye.